Okay, so first of all, let me apologize that we ended up delaying this series, as there were other projects on the main channel that I wanted to do, but I am one to never just leave things hanging, for the most part. So anyway, top 11 Yu-Gi-Oh openings. Number 11, Voice, the first opening of Duel Monsters by Cloud. Kind of appropriate that we start to wrap up these rankings with kinda the first opening ever. I mean, there's still technically one more, but we'll get to that in just a bit. Regardless, this intro is still considered to be a classic, and for good reason. It had the difficult task of introducing everyone to both this new show and its accompanying card game. For the latter, they did very effectively by showing off the key cards of the two eternal rivals of the whole franchise, Yugi and Kaiba. And while I'm pretty sure the Curse of Dragon could never beat the Blue Eyes without support, it was awesome to see all of Yugi's more prominent cards gathering behind him, especially Exodia. You know, even though that wasn't gonna last long. Meanwhile, all of his friends just kind of get little quick cut-ins to introduce them. This is kind of justified, as other than Jonochi, no one else is going to duel much for this first leg of the series. Then at least Bakura got an effective shot showing off his literal inner demon. From there, we got a nice classic anime shot of the protagonist staring at an enlarged version of the antagonist of this part of the show, Pegasus, to establish his overwhelming control over them and the very card game they were playing as its creator. Lastly, while not exactly my preferred tunes, Voice is a definite earworm that I just can't get out of my head even to this very day. Helps that the lyrics do match up quite well with the show in general. Sure, while they're more likely describing a lover struggling with their anxieties of approaching their partner, they could also be seen as Yugi trying to get to know his other self a little more and vice versa. Or, you know, it could also be about lovers, but no, let's not go there. Still, strong lyrics and some iconic visuals that, for whatever reason, were taken out of the 20th anniversary HD remake of this opening easily earned this one of the top spots on my list. Number 10. Burn, the second opening of Arc 5 by Bullet Train. Entering into the top 10, as well as some of my favorites of particular seasons. In this case, we have the opening that they kind of wisely closed out this series to. I mean, the actual ending to Arc 5 was all kinds of disappointing, but at least they chose some nice tunes to end on a whimper with. But putting aside what the show eventually devolved into, this opening rightfully did get us excited for the season. Hell, as much as I do dunk on this season, I won't deny Yuya running past his main competitors during the tournament arc of this part of the series was just kind of heartwarming. Part of it was definitely due to his happier, entertainment duel-focused demeanor, where it's clear he did genuinely want to make people happy during this part of the series, in spite of his naivete subtly shown through us through this blink and you'll miss slip-up. The other major component that helps is of course the song itself. Another song clearly designed specifically for this series with a ton of references to Yuya's catchphrase and the card game. Who knows, maybe the title is referring to this band's preferred playstyle. But yeah, the lyrics do an excellent job describing Yuya's goals of becoming an entertainment duelist and living up to his father's legacy. This ends up making it easily one of the most uplifting tunes of the franchise, which in some ways is even kind of literal, with Yuya being pulled up by his pendulum monsters in a very nice sequence. Yeah, as always, I like it when we get to see the monsters of everyone's decks, and while it would have been nice for Yuzu and Gongensaka to get some love, I guess it does make sense to put a little more attention on the three introduced Dimension Boys and their respective dragons. Helped by the fact that I think most of their scenes, in particular Yugo's little spin-out here, was animated by Junpei Ogawa and his dynamic keyframes. Thus, while Arc 5 had arguably one of the worst endings of the franchise, at least they picked the right tunes to go out on. One that did represent one of the brightest and most enjoyable parts of the series. If anything, I do have to admit, I was certainly entertained. Number 9. Braving, the second opening of Zio by Canon. From one seasonal favorite to the next with this one, and good lord, what a much needed upgrade from one of the bomb picks of this list. Okay, so first and foremost, I love this song more than whatever Masterpiece was supposed to be. From what I can gather, Kanon, also known as Yamai, is a singer on Nico Nico Doga known for her powerful Megurine Luca-esque voice. And as a result of sounding like a Vocaloid, she has built a solid career for herself starring a viral site, and deservedly so because the opening bars of this song really get me excited. I don't even really know how to describe it because, again, I'm no music expert, but I think there's just something about the rising tempo that gets me jazzed all the way until we reach the high note on the title card. And it's not even as though Kanam becomes as intense as some of my other favorites of this list, but there's just something in her bass that I find just as exhilarating. Not to mention, the more somber tunes do match up better with the visuals and lyrics that build up the big conflict of the season involving the war between Dr. Faker and the Trons. Depending on your interpretation, you could view it as them ascribing to the third party in Yuma trying to find a peaceful way to end the conflict, or more on Kaito trying to find ways to rescue his little brother. However you want to view it, the story on display is exciting as we get to see most of the key players involved, while thankfully everyone else is rightfully just shoved into the corner where they belong. Then, of course, we got to see plenty of monsters, mostly Yuma and Kaito, since this is pretty much their arc, though the future true villain of the series, Shark, also gets his time. Would've been nice to see a little more of the Trons, especially their numbers, but whatever, this was a nice tracking shot, so I'll let it pass. And again, it all just matches so well with Kanon singing that I don't have much to complain about other than maybe just removing some superfluous elements from this entire series, but still, this is easily my favorite of this show, representing one of my personal favorite arcs of it, even if it didn't include this guy. Number 8. Teardrop, the third opening of GX by Bowl. Yep, right after the pretty good second opening for this show, this band returned for something much better. Now, don't get me wrong, I still love the more energized tunes of 99%, but at the same time, I feel like this song is more refined and intense in key areas, plus it tells a much better story. The lyrics seem to be speaking from Johan's perspective and his desires to help Judai through some of the more strenuous parts of this series, as not only have the stakes been raised, but he's also starting to succumb to the pressures of being the protagonist of a shonen anime and the responsibilities they entail. Fortunately, Johan was there to guide him until he wasn't. Yep, there are two versions of this opening, where along with replacing certain characters after they were made unavailable, Johan, other than astral projection, had been completely removed from it, having seemingly sacrificed himself to stop the big bad of the series. He didn't, and thus our protagonists were going in to save him, with some mixed results to say the least. Regardless, this opening, and its two versions, did a great job getting across Judai's anxieties that were only exacerbated after failing to protect Johan from a monster of his own creation. The sheer emotions this opening generates more than makes up for its unfortunate lack of animation. Yeah, in many shots, the characters have been clearly drawn by Junpei Ogawa and his thick outlines, and yet we don't really get to see them in motion. The best we do get are admittedly some nice sequences involving the signature monsters of, thankfully, most of the important characters of this arc. This lack of animation frames does prevent this opening from taking the title of my favorite of this season, but for effectively representing one of my favorite storylines of the whole franchise, with a character trying to find both a friend and a part of himself, it earns top marks. Number 7. Believe in Nexus, the fourth opening of 5Ds by Masaaki Endo. You know it's going to be a fun time once a member of Jam Project gets involved. Being also responsible for the show's amazing intro song Clear Mind, Endo is pretty much the guy you go to if you want to blow a few mics and some heads with some of the best vocal cords in the industry. Unlike with the previous entry, there's no real deeper story or meaning to be dug into with this opening, just the kind of basic shonen anime opening with plenty of overcoming adversity with Nakama and all that jazz. But when this guy is doing your jazz, you do not complain. Besides, these visuals are doing more than their fair share of the work, with plenty of dynamic animation that makes us forget about a certain meme, and just makes us appreciate seeing a plain-nosed dragon seemingly kill a guy, though maybe it was just a dual bot, and yeah, this is an awesome shot. In fact, the antagonist of this arc, Iliaster, gets some good representation, being able to show off their mech lords, minus Granel, until later in the series. Makes sense, as they don't want to spoil too much, as even the shooting star dragon was blurred out. Just kind of ignore the fact that the red Nova dragon was clearly visible in all versions of this opening because, it's, Jack Atlas? Still, again, nothing much else really to say. This is just an awesome opening, sung by a guy who can make repeatedly saying a single syllable sound like the most epic thing ever. And we're not even done with him just yet. Number 6. Shuffle, the second opening of Duel Monsters by Masami Okui. Right off the bat, I'll apologize if the following rankings aren't my number 1, but they are yours. Because frankly, all of the top 6 are some of my favorites, and I'm basing these placements mostly on just the little details. It was another situation where I really went back and forth with all of these rankings, especially considering that all of these are at the top of my playlist. Anyway, in spite of the title sounding like it's super on the nose, the actual lyrics of this song are kind of nuanced. It basically tells a tale of someone dealing with the anxieties of their future prospects. In fact, if you listen to the full version of this song, there's actually a whole verse about there being a whole lot of people out there who will betray you. Oh, come on, that wasn't the case back then, though compared to now, well, yeah. And yet, ultimately, the song then encourages people to just trust in their heart and their cards and know not the two things at the same time. Thus, while it does have a lot of references to cards, and some of these lyrics can definitely apply to the Battle C arc when Merrick was trying to control everyone, on its own, it's also a very encouraging and victorious tune with Masami Okui, the artist behind the DigiCarrot openings, and another member of Jam Project really bringing it. Meanwhile, the visuals certainly aren't slacking either. While not exactly as iconic as Voice, this imagery of the Yukis crossing over and Anzu watching the two from a distance does represent some of the major themes of this series very well. From there, we got some nice shots of the Millennium items and the respective holders, and then my favorite part of this opening, Kaiba appearing on every screen in the city, which he does do in the actual show to announce the rules of Battle City, but I'd also like to think he just does it randomly to screw in Yugi. From there, we got a nice suiting up montage to let our lead show off his new drip for this part of the series, and then a really nice shot of all of our protagonists lined up. From there, while I do like this bit of Shizuka behind her brother showing the connection between the two and likely alluding to her initial anxieties of getting her eye surgery, I also do wish we could have seen at least a few of Jonoshi's monsters. Yeah, sure, he lost Red Eyes at the beginning of the season, but come on, guys like Gearfried and Panther Warrior aren't getting any love? No, instead, most of the monsters that appear in this one are from the Faceless Rare Hunters, and are either Bandit Keats monsters or just total jobbers that don't even last a turn in the show proper. This is kind of made up for with the first animated appearance of the Dark Magician Girl and a pretty sweet shot of the God cards in silhouette, but still, it would have been nice to see them fight actually important monsters like Pandora's Dark Magician, or really any of the Rare Hunters ace cards. Still, that is just a minor nitpick for an opening that I always associate with the Battle C arc, and the absolute impracticality of trying to run a tournament in it. But hey, that's Kaiba in a nutshell, right? Number 5. A Yell of Thirst, the opening of Toei's Yu-Gi-Oh! By Field of View. Yeah, don't think I forgot about the good old Season 0. And while I'll admit that Gallop would end up doing a lot of things better later, especially with some of their coloring, seriously, forget Kaiba's green hair, what the hell is going on with the Dark Magician here? Many of Toei's openings, especially back in the 90s, were some of the best, and this is one of them. Field of View are of course best known for doing the opening of Dragon Ball GT, another Toei series that, in spite of the misgivings of the show proper, everyone loves that opening, and this is no different in my opinion. While it is pretty much a love song about someone dealing with heartache and literally thirsting to possibly repair a broken relationship, it also does work surprisingly well with describing the still immature Yugi trying to learn more about his other self, while forming new bonds with his friends beyond just Anzu. And yeah, on that note, while having a few janky bits of late 90s CGI and some of the aforementioned colors, the animation here still really holds up. I especially like this little bit of Yami Yugi appearing from Yugi Shao. There's just so much detail here. and deaths for that monster count that I've been constantly hounding on, well, truth be told, for this particular season, they're not really necessary. Yeah, in case anyone forgot, Yu-Gi-Oh! Wasn't originally one of the most overpushed TCGs ever, but rather a manga about all sorts of fun games, like Russian roulette with poison foods, or table tennis with bombs, or what was the first game? Oh right, stabbing your own hand for cash. Huh. Thus, for a series that covered the chapters before the intro of Pegasus, just having the sequence between Yugi and Kaiba is actually more than enough. Would have been nice to see a little more of the D&D game that was going to close out the season, but still a cute sequence here at the end. You may associate this one mostly with Yu-Gi-Oh! Bridge, but for me, it's definitely one that reminds me of the good old days when Yugi straight up murdered a few guys. Number 4. The Road to Tomorrow, the fifth opening of 5Ds by Masaaki Endo. From one amazing opening to the next, Endo ends 5Ds with my favorite of the series. I mean, what really needs to be said about this one, as it has pretty much everything I look for. Almost everyone's signature monsters, in particular designers, are shown off along with Iliaster and their mech lords. Interestingly though, right at the beginning of the opening, we got to see some of the signature cards of previous series protagonists and rivals, including the Dark Magician, Neos, and of course Karibo, because why not? This was likely tying into how 5Ds was celebrating the franchise's 10th anniversary with this and the Bonds Beyond Time film. Though for whatever reason, they also include cards that no one in the show proper would end up using, and in fact some of them would soon be banned IRL. God, I remember using and abusing that dragon back in the day before it got nerfed. But yeah, with some insanely good animation, in particular some surprisingly great CGI, we got to see some good action. I just love this insanely impractical bit of them going down the side of a building on their motorcycles. Yeah, forget about the stupid meme, and can we just appreciate some of these amazing perspective shots that really got across the scaling of the three main dragons versus mechanical, before ending on a recycled, though still very good animation of Junk Warrior delivering a scrap fist to Zone, even though he was never used during that duel with him. In fact, he kind of just disappeared after the Grand Prix arc and only reappeared during the final episode and duel against Jack. I mean, it's no big deal, as it's still a great capper to an amazing song. The lyrics themselves perfectly encapsulate Yusei's journey throughout the series, with them encouraging him to keep driving towards the infinite possibilities that await him in the future, in spite of any hesitation he might have had. Thus, this was very appropriately used during the final turn of the aforementioned duel with Jack when he solidified his future goals. Honestly, pretty much a perfect opening to end a not so perfect, but still very epic final arc of the series that deserves to be more than just a meme. Number 3. Precious Times, Glory Days, the fourth opening of GX by Psychic Lover. Yeah, you're starting to notice a bit of a pattern with these top ranks. The first thing I think, just looking at some of these scenes, is calm the hell down, Junpei Ogawa. You don't have to make everything look amazing. The second thing I think is that it's a bit of a pity that Card Ejector wasn't used more, especially if she could have given us more cute bits like this. But yeah, this opening mostly featured Judai's monsters, which makes sense as the final arc was mostly about him resolving the conflict with Darkness, as well as coming to terms with his own sins from the previous arc. Besides, everyone else did at least get brief shots of their signature cards, so it worked out for the most part. Most importantly though, and what ultimately puts this above Masaaki Endo and Road to Tomorrow, is of course this amazing tune. First of all, if you've never heard of Psychic Lover, look them up. They've done some of the best openings for Super Sentai, and have actually worked on other card game anime like Bakugan and Vanguard. For me, this is easily one of their best works, as like the previous entry, it perfectly encapsulated the story arc of the main character, that ultimately I did like a lot more than Yusei's. Don't get me wrong, I like both characters, but yeah, I think Judai's journey of realizing the consequences of his actions, like creating Yubel, and even stirring discord because of his inaction and coming to terms with them, were a lot more powerful than the arc of a mostly stoic badass like Yusei. The lyrics are encouraging Judai to not forget about some of his initial dreams, and to keep pushing forward no matter how many times he falls and is reborn again, possibly fused with an eldritch abomination. But yeah, an amazing song to showcase both this series and some of Junpei Ogawa's best work. Again, while the final arc of this series was iffy due to it being cut short, at least they ended on an amazing final note. Number 2. Overlap, the fifth opening of Duel Monsters by Kimeru. Yeah, between this and the number 1, I went back and forth a lot. On the one hand, this entry has easily the song I listen to the most on my phone. That said, the next one also has an amazing song, as well as a few advantages that I'll explain then. Still, with that said, God, Kimeru has an amazing voice, and I do think this is probably one of his best works, for this franchise at least. As I think I've mentioned, I just love songs where the beat starts relatively low-key before escalating to some really high points, though in this case it really helps to tell the story on display with this opening. This was the story arc where the pharaoh was trying to learn about himself and his true name. Thus, this song kinda starts off with a tune of wonder as he's learning more about his past, before things get epic as not only do the god cards show up, but so does Thief King Bakura and his monsters with very unique designs. Oh yeah, speaking of monsters, much like the previous entry, I don't think they were necessary for this one, because as I recall, there was only like one actual duel during this arc, and 90% of it was just ancient Egypt stuff. The only monsters that really needed to be shown were Bakura's aforementioned ones, as well as the three main monsters of Yugi and Kaiba, as this arc was pretty much their origin stories. Back to the song itself, I'm almost convinced it was specifically written for this opening, as the lyrics do pretty much describe the pharaoh's whole arc here of trying to regain his lost memories. Sure, they don't name any names or use exact terminology like other openings, so this could also be interpreted as someone trying to overcome an adversity that overlaps with someone else's similar goals. But with visuals that key up almost perfectly with certain lyrics like two hearts working together or some big red eyes looking at them, yeah, it's hard to say this is just mere coincidence. Whatever the case though, this is visually some of Studio Gallop's best work. My favorite sequence easily being the arrival of the god cards, as each of them was actually animated by a different artist. Takaaki Sekizaki, Kazunori Takahashi, and of course Junpei Ogawa. They work together to make some really epic visuals that gets you hyped up for this card game anime that has barely any card games in it at this point. Regardless, just an amazing opening that got across the many emotions of the pharaoh and even a little of Kaiba during this final arc of the original series. What else really needs to be said? You know, other than why isn't this my favorite opening of the franchise? Well... Number 1. Warriors, the fourth opening of Duel Monsters by Yuichi Ikusawa. Yep, I think the best of this series and the franchise as a whole was actually the second to last opening. Again, don't get me wrong, I went back and forth a lot with this decision and listened to both songs multiple times. In terms of subjective quality, I'd argue they're neck and neck with even some very similar elements like a bit of the god cards appearing at the beginning, and then having a bit of Anzu contemplating her connection with the pharaoh. Though for this opening, I do like how they include Yuki in the conversation to ask the question who she cares for the most in the end. The pharaoh who saved her multiple times, or the vessel who happened to be a childhood friend who she cared about even before the events of the show. This one also has the advantage of having this very beautiful shot of Jonochi running against the sunset with his red eyes passing by to symbolize his desire to surpass his friend and rival in Yuki, with one of the last shots even featuring the two. You can't convince me this isn't one of the greatest romances ever. And while Overlap, as a song, won in terms of how many times I re-listened to it, I do have to admit this one filled me with a few more emotions each time I listened to it. Part of that might have been because it's the one I associate the most with Duel Monsters, as it was the longest lasting opening, technically covering 3 different major story arcs. Sure, it was mostly the beginning and ending of 2 of them, but I still count as 3. Hell, just the fact that it could be used for 3 different arcs does show how it can represent this series, and even the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise as a whole, as these lyrics can apply to pretty much all of the protagonists. The lyrics describe someone who, in spite of having dreams of their own, has to put those aside, sometimes out of necessity in order to survive, and other times for the benefit of others. During those times, it does become frustrating how little they actually live for themselves, and yet with grit and determination, they become warriors who eventually will be able to live both for themselves and others. Or at least, that's my personal interpretation of this song, but do feel free to let me know yours as well as the other songs in the comments below. Regardless, for me at least, it's an inspiring song for a card game that I grew up loving to play. And while I haven't touched it in ages, this and the other openings always manage to bring me back to those good old days. Even some of the worst do manage to bring up at least some good memories, while the current series are at least starting to make new ones for me. And seeing as how we ran into pretty much no real issues with uploading these videos, knock on wood, I do hope to revisit this franchise sooner rather than later for this channel. However, next time, whenever we get to it, we'll be taking a look at a TCG that might be making a comeback in the States soon enough. Also, do check out the main channel for magical girl stuff, including a new series that we'll be covering soon. So do look forward to all of that. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and I've always wondered, what would happen if I tried to disassemble this guy? Yeah, probably not.